Everyone, I'm Ella Matthews. I'm Congressman Jim Cooper's health staffer, and I'm here today with our counsel, Jimmy Balzer, to talk about the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, or the ACA. The ACA became law a decade ago. It was the largest expansion of healthcare coverage in the nation in the last half century, giving healthcare to more than tens of millions of Americans and protecting and improving benefits for millions more. It affects all aspects of the healthcare system and has never successfully been repealed or replaced because the law works. I'm going to talk more about the ACA and what is at risk if the law is struck down. But first, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Jimmy Balzer, to talk about the litigation and the arguments heard before the Supreme Court this morning.
Thanks, Ella. So we all remember in 2012 when Republicans challenged the constitutionality of the Affordable Care Act. In that case, Chief Justice Roberts sided with the progressive wing of the court to uphold the individual mandate and most of the law. Now, since that time, Republicans have repeatedly failed to overturn the law in Congress, in the House, and the Senate, and are again turning to the courts to do their dirty work for them. So today, in a case called California v. Texas, the Supreme Court heard arguments in a new challenge brought by 18 Republican states, 2 individual plaintiffs, and the Trump administration, challenging the constitutionality of the individual mandate, which is a requirement that in the Affordable Care Act, nearly all Americans get health insurance. The plaintiffs claim that when Congress reduced the individual mandate penalty to $0, the mandate in the ACA suddenly became unconstitutional. But they don't actually stop there. Some of the plaintiffs have advanced an extreme theory that by zeroing out the tax, the entire ACA must fall because they say the provision is not severable from the rest of the law. So the Supreme Court has to decide a couple things. 1, the constitutionality of the individual mandate again, and 2, if the mandate is found to be unconstitutional, whether the mandate provision is severable from the rest of the ACA. And before we even get to those questions on the merits, the justices will have to answer the threshold question of standing, which is a procedural question of whether the plaintiffs even have a right to sue in this case. And in fact, much of the oral arguments of the court today centered on whether or not the plaintiffs actually suffered an injury because of the individual mandate and therefore have standing to sue at all. So how is this case different than the previous cases on the ACA that appeared before the court? If you feel like this case is familiar, it is. The question of constitutionality of the individual mandate was also at the center of that Supreme Court 2012 ACA litigation. The decision when Roberts joined the 4 liberals on the court and upheld the mandate as part of the Congress's taxing power. The ACA, or parts of it, have actually been in front of the Supreme Court half a dozen times, and Republicans keep trying and failing to overturn it. So their arguments in getting rid of it have gotten crazier and crazier, culminating in this case. Now, the legal argument at the center of this suit that's putting the entire ACA at risk, that reducing the tax in the individual mandate to 0 fells the other parts of the law, including things like protections for people with pre-existing conditions and prescription drug affordability, and the ability for young adults to stay on their parents' health insurance, is so ridiculous that a couple of years ago, career DOJ attorneys actually withdrew rather than put their names on that brief. And even Senator Lamar Alexander said it was one of the most far-fetched legal arguments he has ever heard. The guy who eventually did sign on to the DOJ brief in support of this, Chad Riedler, was rewarded by Trump with a lifetime seat on the 6th Circuit Court of Appeals. This is the kind of case that only gets to the Supreme Court because of the sorry state of our federal judiciary and because of the cowardice of the Republicans who know they can't convince most Americans to join their crusade to get rid of the law. So Trump and his cronies who are endorsing this legal argument won't admit that this is what they want, but they've already tried to repeal the ACA on the floor of the Senate and failed. Now they've just delegated the job to their lawyers in the court to do it for them. To that end, Trump went out of his way this year to find a Supreme Court justice to replace Justice Ginsburg, Amy Coney Barrett, who has been openly hostile to the survival of the ACA and dismissive of John Roberts' majority opinion in the 2012 ACA case that upheld the individual mandate. What would replace the ACA? Well, it's been 10 years since the ACA originally passed, and there hasn't been any serious proposal to replace it. If the Republican-appointed justices do strike down the law, I think it's only really delusional people believe that suddenly the Republicans will introduce a plan to replace it after a decade of House and Senate Republicans kicking and screaming about the law without actually doing anything. How does the election of Biden and Harris impact what happens next? In January, President-elect Joe Biden could withdraw the DOJ's support for the plaintiffs, but the state and the individual litigants would actually still be there, so that's not very likely to impact the outcome of the case. Now, on the off chance that the Democrats take the Senate back after the Georgia special elections, it's possible that Democrats could restore the individual mandate's penalty. Now, this would put us back in the scenario where the mandate was upheld by the Supreme Court in 2012 and moot the case. So the Democrats could reimpose the original penalty of $600 and some odd, or even put in a token penalty of something like $1. When will we have a decision? The court could decide anytime next year, but typically we'd expect to get a decision in May or June.
Thanks, Jimmy. As I said before, the ACA is the largest healthcare coverage expansion in more than half a century. What does that mean? So the largest gain was through Medicaid expansion. To date, 34 states and DC have been matched with billions of dollars in federal funds to expand Medicaid to 15 million low-income adults who previously weren't eligible for coverage. This is something that the state of Tennessee has refused to do, but would still be an opportunity under the ACA. It would allow Tennessee to give 300,000 additional Tennesseans healthcare coverage, and the state would get $1 billion a year to help us pay for care for our citizens. In Tennessee, the rate for pre-existing conditions is even higher than the rest of the nation. About 1 in 3 non-elderly adults has a pre-existing condition. This is even more alarming when you think about COVID-19, where as of today, 10 million people have tested positive. That includes 300,000 people in Tennessee. All of these people could be denied coverage because COVID-19 could have given them a pre-existing condition. Other groups that got insurance coverage from the ACA include 2.3 million children under the age of 26 who are now able to stay on their parents' plans. It also provided coverage for young adults who were moving out of the foster care system, and also provided coverage for over 200,000 Tennessee children. The other aspect of the ACA that can't go unrecognized is the inclusion of coverage for preventative services like cancer screenings, immunizations, well child visits, as well as the 10 essential health benefits like hospitalization, mental health and substance abuse treatment, and prescription drugs. This means that because of the ACA, every plan must make sure these things are covered and that you can go and receive these services. These are only a few of the benefits of the ACA. It doesn't even include non-discrimination protections or the FDA's ability to approve certain biosimilars. It also lowered the cost of Medicare. Facing the repeal of the ACA in the middle of a health crisis and a global pandemic is even more alarming. Millions have already lost their jobs and in turn their coverage, and so many Americans will be left with lifelong health issues with no coverage. Luckily, even though the case is being litigated now, the ACA remains the law of the land. We thank you for listening, and we'll be following along until the decision comes, but please let us know if you have any questions. Thanks again.